Hey everyone, our guest today is Doug Warner, Head of Business Innovation at Amazon Web Services. Hey Doug, how's it going?
Doing, Aria?
Great, thanks so much for joining us today.
Love to be here. Always fun to chat with you.
hmm Yep, for sure. And at the start of every one of our episodes, I usually ask for our guests to give a brief history of their career, a brief summary of their career. But I kind of want to go through each of your different pit stops
Sure.
in a little more detail. So I know you worked at Shutterfly and you actually founded that company and were working there up until the early 2000s, right? And I know at that time it was kind of the bridge between physical goods and now digital goods, right? A lot of things were shifting to the digital world, and Shutterfly, your company, was a bit of a pioneer in that aspect, and things were also getting a lot more personal in that digital shift as well. So, could you walk us through some of your execution at Shutterfly and what you did there?
Sure. So first things, just to correct the record a little, I wish I was the founder of Shutterfly, which I wasn't, but I was a
Okay,
member.
sorry about that.
It's all good. It's all good. I was a member of the initial team when
hmm
seed funded and one of the first employees there. So it was
hmm
almost as good as being the founder. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was the dot-com boom of the late 1990s, and in the world of photography and the sharing of images and photos, it really was the world of Kodak, and it had been for about 100 years at least.
hmm
They invented the
Yep.
term the Kodak moment. And so what Butterfly really sought to do, and it was really the two founders' vision, was to seize on the emergence of digital cameras that were coming out. And believe it or not, these were like less than 1 megapixel, which means you
hmm
like a postage stamp in terms
Yeah.
of something clear in terms of an image. And they basically saw the future, and the idea was to disrupt and make it much more convenient for people than going to the local drugstore or going to the local department store that had a photo department, and
hmm
simply send in their film or upload their digital images from their new cameras that they were starting to buy, and to be able to share those images and to only print the images they wanted, see the images first, and actually make products from the
hmm
images.
Yep.
Until that,
Those little keepsakes like a mug or
yeah, think
anything
about
like
it like
that.
a photo album of your vacation, or your baby pictures, or even your
hmm
holiday greeting cards. Up until that time, you basically had to go get the film developed and pay before you actually
hmm
knew what you had. And what digital really let you do, like everyone knows today with smartphones, is take as many pictures as you wanted and be able to decide on the ones you wanted to turn into something, some kind of product or some kind of gift, to preserve
hmm
memories or to make an announcement on a greeting card, share holiday wishes, or whatever it may be. So that was really the goal at Shutterfly to begin with.
That's awesome. And it's funny that you mentioned how the shift away from Kodak happened because your next pit stop was Vonage. And sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. Vonage? Vonage? But
Yeah, that's okay. Well, I can kind of
mhm,
give you the heritage. So Shutterfly
mhm,
was the beginning, or not the beginning, but the mass part of the internet boom, where digital started disrupting different industries. And for those who can remember, it really started with email. Email was the
mhm,
first thing that people who were of age at that time realized was a new way to do things. And it was easy with email because email involved a few sentences. It then went on to photography because of digital cameras and because of still images. And after
mhm,
photography, it accelerated with the rise of broadband and other technologies that
mhm,
supported it to impact music, impact video, impact publishing, and obviously today it's impacting everything. So I went from Shutterfly to HP, where I spent
mhm.
18 years, and a lot of that
Yeah.
time was really at the forefront. HP is short for Hewlett Packard.
Hmm.
A lot of that time was spent testing out and trying to disrupt other industries like music, like video, like publishing, like wearable tech from
Hmm.
traditional technology.
Which we'll talk about later
We
as
will,
well.
right.
Hmm.
And then Vonage after HP, which was more recent, where I led global strategy and operations for Vonage, was really, or for Vonage is what we call their communication platform as a service business.
Hmm.
That was really about enabling companies to communicate with their customers through any device in
Hmm.
any location at any time. So, for
Hmm.
example,
I know you guys had
yeah,
a big emphasis on the API economy business model, right?
exactly. So, the same way today, if you're building a website, you don't have to build a shopping cart. If
Hmm.
you're building any form of interaction from contact centers and customer support to insurance adjustment apps, and you want to communicate with your customer through text, through video, through voice, you're not going to build those core capabilities. You're going to plug
Hmm.
in the services from another company, and Vonage provided those kinds of services.
Hmm. Yep, and it's funny because I was gonna say that I actually interviewed Omar Javed
Right.
a few episodes ago, and we did a little case study on the fall of Kodak and the rise of digital cameras.
Uh huh.
So it's great that you mentioned that,
Yeah.
and we'll get into more of that cell phone to mobile computer uh, range topic later.
Okay.
So then your next pit stop, your current pit stop is Amazon Web Services,
Right.
of course. So if you could go into a little bit about what you do there.
Sure. So I joined Amazon Web Services, which, was one of the pioneers in what we call the public cloud, which really meant shifting the ability for companies to not have to buy their own servers and support their own data
Hmm.
centers, but rent out as a utility the
Hmm.
computing related needs like storage and computing and networking that they need, and treat it as an operational expense rather than a capital investment. So they
Yeah.
could scale
Hmm.
up and down with changes that go on in their business rather than have to make this big investment and be in a business
Hmm.
they're not in. So the great analogy I really try to give everybody is if you opened up a delicatessen or a restaurant, you wouldn't start to buy a whole bunch of generators and put them in your backyard for electricity. You would get it from the electric company. So if you're
Hmm.
opening up, or you are a retailer, or you're an automobile company, or you're an online digital video company, or whatever it may be, why would you want to build out capabilities that fundamentally is not what you serve your customers with?
Hmm.
So it's very analogous to that at Amazon Web Services.
Great. Thanks so much for giving me a little overview of everything you've done up until this point. And now I wanted to talk about your education. You
Sure.
went to Duke, obviously, and you got your MBA and JD at Duke. And I myself am applying there for college. We're in college application season.
Hmm.
So kind of stressed about that. But I wanted to ask you what are maybe two or three things that are less known about Duke, but hold a special place in your heart
Sure.
for our viewers and personally for me, for
Sure.
my information.
So I was very fortunate. I went to Duke Law School and Business School at the same time, and it's a wonderful place that mixes
Hmm.
a small liberal arts kind of college focus, meaning personalized attention, with the
Hmm.
breadth and depth of a large university. Some of the special things about Duke that I remember that everyone wouldn't know is for many, 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 many years, Duke ran a pub on campus called the
Hmm.
Hideaway. And it was actually a student run business right in the middle of campus that served the student population over 21 years old. And it was owned by students, undergraduates, as well as law school students, as well as
Wow.
business school students. And we ran it as a business. And I had the good fortune of being one of the principals to run that business.
I don't know if that would fly now,
Yeah,
but
well, remember,
yeah.
it was all legal over 21
Hmm.
and everything
Yep.
else about it, but that was really phenomenal. Great opportunity in terms of entrepreneurship. And the other thing, which is better known than that, is Duke has a wonderful golf club right outside
Hmm.
campus called the Washington Duke. which is
Mhm.
really a world class golf club, and any student can go there, undergrad or grad, and play golf at really, peanuts in terms of cost. So it's a
Mhm.
really, really kind of special place.
Mhm. That's awesome. And I just wanted to ask, since one of the things that had me interested in Duke obviously was
Sure.
basketball. And I know now for the past, I don't know how long it's been, maybe since you went there, they, every North Carolina versus Duke game, they set up tents and wait for days, weeks in advance. So
Yep.
I just wanted to ask if they still did that when you went there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting the way Duke worked. I'm not sure exactly how it works today, but undergrad
Mhm.
students had to camp out for every game for their tickets. Graduate
Wow.
students could camp out for season tickets. And
Mhm.
so we would go camp out in groups, and we would all decide that if some of us got tickets and others didn't, we would share those tickets throughout the season.
Yep.
And we did that. And
Mhm.
basketball at Duke is almost like religion. And I had the
Yeah.
really special fortune to be there when Coach
Mhm.
Krzyzewski was there. And he also
Yep.
taught some of us in the business school as well. So
Wow.
it was a
Mhm.
really good place to be and a really special part of university sports history.
Mhm. Were you there when Grant Hill was
I
playing there?
was. I was there with Grant Hill, and actually one of my classmates in business and law school was the assistant coach when I was there. And
Wow.
before he was the assistant coach, he was the captain of the basketball team. And he is, I believe, now a pro basketball coach. His name is Quinn Snyder.
Of Quinn Snyder, he used to coach the Timberwolves,
He
right?
used to coach the Utah Jazz as well. I'm not sure where
Yeah,
he is at the
Utah
moment.
Jazz.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yep. All right. Yep. Definitely have heard of him. So that's awesome. Great experience. And our podcast today, of course, is on business models. We'll get into a lot of the specifics later on. But for our listeners, just before we get into that stuff, could you give a little overview on the different aspects and different types of business models and why they're crucial for understanding a company's path to
Yeah,
success?
sure. I love the topic, so I was thrilled when you asked
Mm-hmm.
me to, come on and talk about this among other things.
Mm-hmm.
It would seem at its core that business models are really simple. It's really straightforward. Can you get in front of the right customer with something they want, provide it to them in a way that costs you less than it costs
Mm-hmm.
to make it or deliver it? But it turns out that's super, super tricky and not as straightforward as you think, certainly not at scale. So I'll kind of break down business models at their most simple way. I mean, it's basically about, you know, what are you offering that meets some kind of a need in the market with a specific group of customers? So let's call that a value proposition. And is
Mm-hmm.
it unique or different enough that they would want to get it from you?
Mm-hmm.
Who are those customers? Meaning, what is your target audience or your customer segment? What are their behaviors? And I'll give you some real examples of this in a second. How do you reach those customers? Like, how do they even know
Yep.
you exist? And can you do that effectively? And then, what kind of economic model do you use with them? Is it free? And do you make money from advertising, which, of course, is the
Mm-hmm.
way traditional television worked for a really long time? Or are you charging them a transaction for each purchase or each engagement? Or, for example, are you charging them a subscription? So,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the nature of what you're offering, all of that comes down to, can you deliver something that is really compelling, that makes a difference to them, and do it in a way that creates value for them and also for you? And that's not
Mm-hmm.
as easy as it sounds.
Yeah. Yep. And so we talked about that transition from physical to digital.
Yep.
And I know many business models had to evolve after that shift happened, right?
Mm.
A lot of retail stores and stores with physical products had to evolve and make a digital website with digital orders, right? And I know one example for me personally is gaming. We used to collect the discs and cartridges,
Mhm.
um, and disc cases, right? And I actually really like that. But now everything is digital. We go on the Xbox store and you just click a button and you download the game, right? So, could you talk about the importance of this disruption on reshaping industries and business models.
Sure. Sure. So, I assume we're talking about starting with e-commerce fundamentally at
Hmm.
some.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So when I was thinking about this earlier, I wanted to say that, at the end of the day, commerce is really as old as the earliest human civilizations.
Hmm.
Commerce and trade have been going on for thousands of years. It used to be like I wanted your goat and you needed water, and I lived near a stream, so I'd give you certain number of jugs of water and you'd give me a goat, and I'd have to be really close to you to do it, like in your neighborhood,
Hmm.
right near you. And it was laborious. And so that inability, that friction or that challenge of trading was really tough. And that's the era of
Yeah.
bartering, and then the world
Hmm.
moved to gold and physical
Hmm.
things that they could exchange, like gold or
Yep.
silver, which were common. And more recently, not recently as in the current days, but in civilization's arc, we move to
Hmm.
currencies, or what we think of it as money, but they're really called fiat
Yeah.
currencies. And now digital currencies, meaning most of the world's money today is not on paper, it's on
Hmm.
ledgers between organizations and people that say you owe money and I owe money. So
Yeah.
e-commerce, which is really only a thing of the last 25, 30 years, is really about decoupling the location of where you can find something to purchase it and how it's
Hmm.
delivered, and separating all
Yeah.
those. So it makes it much more affordable and accessible and reachable, depending, no matter where
Hmm.
you are. Someone can buy a fishing rod, let's say, that lives in North Dakota, or someone can buy a boat that lives in North Dakota, even though it may be available in Florida. Or a
Yep.
better example, perhaps like you were talking about, is I no longer have to go to the physical music store to purchase music. Not only that,
Hmm.
but I can actually not purchase music as a album or a physical thing. I can uncouple it to its element, which is, let's say, a
Hmm.
song, and I may not even have to pay for it by the song. I may be able to subscribe. So it's
Yeah.
really unbundled the value scenarios that go on in someone wanting something, someone delivering something, and the way in which they can pay for that has really, really changed. But I want to emphasize, companies like Amazon and Tesla and others, and I'll give you real examples of this in a second, were not the first. As far back as the early 20th century, Sears, which you might not remember, many of the older folks on this podcast.
I remember back in the early 2010s
Right. Well,
going to the mall,
Sears was
Sears.
everywhere when my parents were growing up and earlier, and
Hmm.
Sears essentially invented the catalog,
Yep.
which is the
Hmm.
physical version of e-commerce, if you will.
Hmm.
And you could buy everything and anything you wanted, including a house. They would send you the kit
Oh
for
wow.
a house. And
Hmm.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the term of a craftsman bungalow. It's a type of house which is all
Hmm.
over the United States in old neighborhoods. The Craftsman house was sold out of the Sears catalog, and it would come in a kit, and a local contractor would put it together for you. Think of it like
Wow.
IKEA, a house in a box.
Hmm.
So it really changed the nature of convenience, affordability, and the ability to offer different things to different people everywhere. And it made
Hmm.
scarcity much, much lower. And that, of course, has positives and challenges associated with it. But that's the basics of e-commerce overall,
Hmm.
is opening up the accessibility, or the term we like to use is democratizing the
Hmm.
ability to offer goods and services to people, no matter where they are, in different ways, at high convenience.
Hmm. Great, thank you. And we talked about that shift from physical to digital with e-commerce, and then digital kind of shifted more to mobile and cloud. And one of the biggest examples of that is the shift from cell phones to mobile computers
Hmm.
in the mid 2000s, right? So one of my prior interviews, I interviewed a venture capitalist. His name's Dan Herscovici,
Hmm.
and he was actually the product manager for the Motorola Razr back when that was the
I had
biggest
one of
phone
those.
on the market. Hmm.
Yep.
Yep. And as we know, those are often carrier subsidized, right?
Sure.
But then Apple in 2007 disrupted that whole ecosystem
Right.
with smartphones, right? So I wanted to know your thoughts on how this shift impacted industries and also consumer behavior.
Yeah. I think it was really profound. I mean, we all lived through that in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Up until Apple came out with the smartphone and you had Motorola and Nokia and even BlackBerry for messaging,
Yep.
the power really sat with the carriers, the Verizons,
Mm-hmm.
the AT&Ts of the world, the T-Mobiles in the United States, and of course their equivalents in other countries. And you would buy into their plans, which were typically locked in for a period of years. And the
Mm-hmm.
phone came with a plan where you bought the phone, but you were really buying the plan. And
Yeah.
what Apple really accomplished by creating their entire ecosystem was unbundling the phone from the plan and really accelerating the need for carriers to offer much more competitive, flexible approaches to people
Mm-hmm.
to get their service. Essentially, it commoditized the services and it put the value into the customer experience of the phone, the apps, the ecosystem, rather than the telecommunications ecosystem of simply having voice and, of course, with the smartphone data. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was really the fundamental shift. And of course, that split the world really in simplistic terms into two universes: the iOS universe of Apple and the Android universe, which has many
Mm-hmm.
derivatives. And those two universes now dominate, overwhelmingly dominate the global market for phones today.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And honestly, my last episode, we were talking about how iPhone dominated that space, especially in enterprise situations, because Android just wasn't secure enough, right? It was more of
Right.
an open system.
Great. So you were talking about Android and iPhone and security. The one thing I wanted to mention about that is, with Apple and Android coming out with smartphones, what really happened in part was people wanted to bring their phone to work. The phone became a very personalized device versus a random device. And so behavior really changed quite substantially because now your phone was kind of a part of your life versus just something you picked up to call somebody. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a really big deal, and it still is even to this day.
Yep, definitely. And another business, sorry, another business model that's very popular recently in the last decade is the sharing economy model. Obviously, Airbnb and Uber are two of the biggest users of this model. And I wanted to ask your take on how this model has disrupted traditional industries like the taxi industry
Sure.
and hotels, right? And if honestly, in many situations, these business models are more cost friendly to the consumer than a taxi or a hotel, right? I know in New York City, you probably don't want to take an Uber everywhere, right?
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, at their core, the sharing economy is a wonderful concept of leveraging underutilized assets. Think of it as originally the couch in someone's house or a bedroom, and getting more economic value out of it by making more inventory or availability. The reality of the sharing economy is that they're really driven by marketplace platforms, two-sided platforms, where you have supply and you have demand, and the different players like Airbnb and Uber create or try to create as trusted a marketplace to put the two together as they can. In the early days of marketplaces, one of the biggest challenges is, and I'm using those two players as an example, really is getting enough scale on both sides to create network effects so that, if you don't have enough people renting out their places, you don't have anyone interested in renting. You don't have anyone, if you don't have anyone interested in renting, you don't have anyone who wants to join up and provide their places. So it's a chicken and an egg problem, so to speak. And in the early days, an argument could be made that the marketplaces like Airbnb and Uber, among many others, use their platforms to go in and sell services below their economic value, meaning low cost, to pull people in. And then once they got to a critical mass, the costs went up. So,
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
example, today, if you take an Uber from from JFK in New York to New York City, it might be equally as expensive as a taxi. It might be twice the price as a taxi. Whereas if you did it 10 years ago, it might have been half the price of a taxi. So they're still working out the mechanics of how to optimize delivering value to customers while giving them price. But early days, it was clearly convenience and price driven. Now the jury is out a little bit more on where the value really comes from, and depends on who you ask. The renter, the driver, versus the consumer or the customer that actually consumes the supply.
Hmm.
So
Yep. Hmm. So now let's get into some of your work with wearables and HP. And
sure.
I know you guys worked with Michael Bastian as well, who I interviewed a few episodes ago. And one of the things that he noted was that for the consumer, it's not just about the technical aspects of the wearable. It's just the wearable is first and foremost about fashion and how it makes the consumer feel, right? So I wanted to talk about companies like Whoop and Catapult, whose global head of marketing I also interviewed, and their offering of subscription based services, right? And I wanted to ask your take on that and what you think the most important part about the wearable business model is.
Sure. So you bring up two very interesting kind of groups of things. Whoop and Catapult are really, um, I want to call them B2B type of offerings, even
Mm-hmm.
though they're used by
Yep.
end users.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when we were making smarter watches for Michael Bastian,
Mm-hmm.
Movado, Coach, Tommy Hilfiger, etc.,
Yep.
watches are really personal adornment. They are jewelry. At the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, they are worn as symbols. They are worn for how you feel. They are
Mm-hmm.
not primarily worn for function. I don't think you're going
Yep.
to get a lot of people to tell you they wear a watch because they need to tell time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not why they wear the product.
Yeah.
Counter that with Whoop and Catapult. Whoop primarily targets fitness enthusiasts, health conscious individuals, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Catapult targets professional sports teams, coaches, and organizations. If you really step back, and I don't know how they'd answer this question, but you ask their CEOs, what business are you really in? I don't think they'd say, I'm in the business of selling functional watches or functional
Yeah.
wrist straps, which
Mm-hmm.
is what, Coach would say, we're in the business of putting beauty
Mm-hmm.
on your hand, let's say, or something like that, or Michael Bastian might say that.
Mm-hmm.
I think these companies would say we're in the business of improving your health and well-being or improving
Yep.
your performance as an athlete, and the actual wristband is just a method of getting to
Mm-hmm.
that goal. And
Yeah.
so their brand promise is different, and I think at the end of the day, they're trying to um, monetize that through a subscription service, because athletic performance for professionals, or wellness over time for real health enthusiasts, let's say people who run marathons all the time,
Mm-hmm.
is not a one time thing. It's an ongoing
Yeah.
need.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, they try to fit the business model of a subscription, which is reoccurring, to the need of the user, which in this case is an athlete or a sports team or an organization and a collection of users.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And now let's talk about usage based pricing,
Sure.
specifically in insurance, because one of the most popular uses of this model is in car insurance now, where you pay based on the miles you drive and not that one time payment, right? So, what do you think the future of variable cost versus fixed cost is in this field?
Yeah, I think insurance presents a special case. And of course, everything I'm sharing is just my personal opinion here. But insurance is a tough one on usage for a variety of reasons. One of them is that insurance straddles the line between a public good and a private good, in the sense of there are always going to be people who are higher risk. Think of it similar to healthcare insurance. There are always going to be people who are higher risk and people who are lower risk and cost more. And there are a lot of laws and regulations around what you can and can't do by state. And the core method that insurance has traditionally used is to insure a pool, a population, and then spread the risk over the population so that everyone pays what you and I would call a fair or reasonable or affordable price. The challenge potentially with usage based models for insurance companies is that you get closer and closer to the personal characteristics of the individual. And many of those characteristics might make them either uninsurable or discriminatory in terms of
Yeah.
policies.
Hmm.
And as a society, the society has to make policy decisions about, let me give you an example. Is it really insurance if you only insure people who never, ever, ever have a car accident?
Yeah.
I wouldn't call that insurance. I would call that
Hmm.
probably something else.
Yeah.
So I think we're still feeling our way into the level that personalization of variable rates
Hmm.
can impact something like insurance. And so I say the jury is out on
Yeah.
the long term feasibility of variable priced insurance,
Hmm. Yep.
especially if you're getting down to the individual level.
Definitely. Yep. And now a little more fun topic, crowdsourcing, right? So crowdsourcing has been gaining a lot of popularity over the last decade, a little bit more than a decade. And actually, one of the first smartwatches, Pebble, was emerging from a Kickstarter campaign. So I wanted to ask you what the potential for crowdsourcing is in business models today.
Yeah, I think crowdsourcing is amazing. Your dad and I actually knew some of the original people on the Pebble team from that Kickstarter campaign that essentially started the wearables trend and the consumer side. That, along with the Nike Fuel Band, which was not, to my knowledge, crowdsourced. I think it's awesome. I mean, at the end of the day, it gets back to the issue in business on business models and it gets back to how do you know there's an opportunity that of something people want and need? And crowdsourcing is a wonderfully agile way to figure out if there is a potential market of interest for something and to get feedback before you have to invest lots and lots of money to actually guess. The less money you can invest to put an idea in front of people and actually see if it resonates, the better. And I think crowdsourcing is a wonderful way to do that.
Hmm. Yep. Awesome. So, our last question for today before your 5 key takeaways, which we always end with,
Sure.
is something new that we're trying today, which is some rapid fire questions, and they're on business models, of course. So, I'm just going to give you a question, and if you'd be able to answer it pretty concise, that would be awesome. So,
Okay.
we have four today. All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So first question is, would you be able to give a quick example of a freemium business model that's being effectively used today?
Sure. In my personal opinion, there's probably no better freemium model than what you see with Epic's Fortnite video game.
Hmm.
It has
Yep.
hundreds of millions of users, the vast majority of whom do not pay. It's free. And a very small percentage of whom do pay for different things in the model that they want to use for outfits and virtual products, etc. And that model is very common in the gaming industry. So that would be my quick answer, but there's many, many other examples like LinkedIn and Canva and others, which is if you want to create a big environment with a lot of users, a freemium model is often a tremendous way to do it.
Yep. And I relate to your example heavily. So thank you for that.
Yep.
And second, what's an impactful use case for the peer-to-peer or blockchain model?
Yeah, well, I mean, number one would be decentralized finance, and of course, what's happened or what's called DeFi, what's happened with cryptocurrency specifically, and Bitcoin. The ability to use that kind of financial model that's decentralized to move funds around with very low friction has created a tremendous opportunity with both pros and cons. And an example I'll quickly give you is in many countries where they don't have stable currency systems, think countries in Africa, for example, cryptocurrencies have enabled farmers to make microtransactions to buy seeds. and do things on a mobile phone when they're nowhere near a bank, and there are no bank accounts for most
Yeah.
people. So it's a
Hmm.
wonderful example.
Hmm. Great. And then another one, how is AI driven personalization? We talked about how personalization has grown from the early days of physical to now digital, cloud, and now virtual, right?
Mhm.
So, how is AI driven personalization impacted the way that companies approach their consumers?
Oh, tremendously. I mean, at the end of the day, AI driven personalization is really ultimately about two things: delivering things people want that are highly tailored to them, that'll increase their loyalty, give them more satisfaction, help them make choices to buy things because you put the right thing in front of them more often than not, as well as improving efficiencies behind the scenes. So think about a company that sells physical goods. If I am better than you as another company at putting the right things in front of the right people at the right time, all of which can be super enhanced by AI, then I can be far more efficient at being an effective business. And that's a great example. And you see that with Netflix, Amazon, and many, many other companies that deliver things through a digital interface.
Mhm, for sure. And then lastly, we talk about a lot of different geographies on this podcast. So I wanted to ask you, based on different geographies, whether it be India, USA, Europe, Africa, even, are there any business models that stick out as more successful and more used in each of these different geographies? I know obviously the people living there have different needs. So,
Yeah. Well, I'll call one out as an example. I'm not living in all these geographies right now at the moment, and so things change pretty quick. But in China, social commerce is really, really, really big. It's much bigger as a percentage of commerce than it is in any other part of the world. And social commerce essentially means that a combination of social media and e-commerce blended together such that you can't even tell the difference. So there's a company called Pindo in China, that is sort of like Facebook meets WhatsApp meets Amazon all rolled into one, is a really big deal. So that the sellers essentially become the social community. And the transactions are not about going to a web store like they might be with influencers here in the US or an app, but they're actually embedded in the social experience in real time. So different behavioral norms go on in these different parts of the world, and the business models that meet those behavioral norms are going to be most successful. And the example I was giving you in China about social commerce is a great example because, for example, in the U.S., it's almost non-existent by
mhm.
comparison.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That's the first time we've done this, and I think it went really well. Definitely might try and do this in future episodes.
Okay.
So, now, finally, like I said, we do this at the end of every podcast. Would you give us your 5 key takeaways from our entire conversation today?
Wow. Well, I would say top takeaways, right? Number one, the world is always changing and it's really all about people. Business is all about people. So that's point number one. Understand the people in the audience that you think you're trying to serve and how they differ depending on where you are or what you're offering. Second, what is their fundamental problem or challenge that you're trying to solve, and why do you think you can solve it? Is the second thing. The third thing is, who are those specific people or organizations that you think exactly fit the mold? And then the fourth thing is, what is the particular solution or offering that you think will meet that need? And then finally, the fifth thing I would say, simple, is what makes your ability to provide that unique and differentiated over time, such that you can build, maintain, and excel at a business by providing it to those people. So a core theme you'll see in all of that is keep your eye on people and keep your eye on the customer and work backwards from that, and you're probably more likely to be successful than not.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those insights. And thanks again so much for joining us today on this episode of the Exponential Edge podcast. For our viewers, thanks for watching and tune in next time to talk about and learn ideas, trends, topics that will see exponential adoption in the future. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Aria.
See you, Doug.